us the various parliamentary representatives from various constituencies present. We also have with us the former Prime Minister and former member of Parliament, the representative former Mr. Edison James present, and also former opposition leader himself in the person of Lennox Linton present here at this consultation. So we go right across now to the master ceremony, who is, or the chairperson I should say, who is the CAPSEC, Karen Prevost. And just she'll be doing the welcome remark, and also you'll be hearing from the AG the overview of the electoral reform report and a summary of recommendation. Let's go across to the permanent.
Good evening, everyone. We apologize for the late start. However, we are going to begin right now with a word of prayer. Can we stand as we pray the Our Father? Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. Thank you very much. Good evening and a very pleasant welcome to another consultation on electoral reform in the Commonwealth of Dominica. This evening we are at the Northeast Comprehensive School in Wesley to hear from the people of the Northeast on the Sir Dennis Byron Electoral Reform Report, which was presented to the Government of Dominica in June of 2023. After a comprehensive review of our country's electoral processes. At this time, I would like to welcome among us the honorable members of Cabinet who are present, the parliamentary representatives for the Wesley constituency and the Paybush constituency, and we have with us the parliamentary representative and Minister for Education from the Castlebrooks constituency, and Honorable Dr. Vince Henderson as well, who has joined us. I would also like to recognize in our midst the Honorable Attorney General, Honorable Levi Peter. We have with us this evening the former Prime Minister, Edison James. We are very happy that you've joined us, and the former Leader of the Opposition, Mr. Lennox Linton. We welcome you this evening. We would also like to welcome our observers who have been with us for the last 2 weeks, Justice Raphael Masaga of the Commonwealth Secretariat, Ms. Melin Glynn of the OAS, and Mr. Dwight Lay of the OECS. Dr. Kenneth Daru, Special Envoy in the Office of the Prime Minister with responsibility for electoral modernization, permanent secretaries, and other senior government officials. We have with us this evening chairpersons and members of various village councils in the Northeast, members of the media, other invited guests, and those of you who for the last 2 weeks have been following and listening to us live on various social media and media platforms. Over the last 2 weeks, the public consultations have been held on electoral reform, and more specifically on the recommendations of the Sir Dennis Byron report. The Phase 1 report, which focuses on what we have been referring to as the cleansing of the voters list, includes 2 new proposed bills, the Registration of Electors Bill and the Registration of Electors Regulations, and 2 pieces of legislation that would be. And then we have the Phase 2 report, which is concerned with matters of access to the media, campaign financing, and matters related to the Electoral Commission. It also proposes 4 pieces of draft legislation: the House of Assembly Elections Bill, the House of Assembly Elections Regulations, House of Assembly Election Petition Rules, and the Electoral Commission Bill of 2023. Over the last 2 weeks, we've consulted with a number of stakeholders, including the legal fraternity, members of political parties, groups and associations, and this week we are meeting at the community level to hear from you At the community, from you, the voter, we would like to hear your thoughts on electoral reform, but more specifically, we would like to hear your thoughts on the recommendations that have been put forward in the Sir Dennis Byron report. The Attorney General, Honorable Levi Peter, will provide for us an overview of the Sir Dennis Byron report, after which we'll open the floor for your comments, your feedback, and your recommendations as it relates to electoral reform in Dominica. So at this time, I would like to welcome Honorable Levi Peter, who will present to us a summary of the report. Let's welcome Honorable Peter.
Thank you, Madam Chairperson. Cabinet colleagues, members of the Observer Group, Justice Masaga from the Commonwealth Secretariat, Ms. Meline Glynn from the Organization of American States, and Mr. Dwight Lay from the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States, OECS, all village council chairs who are present, all other invited guests, the former Prime Minister, Mr. Edison James, the former Leader of the Opposition, Mr. Linton. Welcome one and all, and I trust we can have a fruitful conversation this evening. As you have heard, the report from Sir Dennis Byron consists of two phases. Phase one focuses on the cleansing of the voters list, and as you heard, is underpinned by the Regulation of Electors Act 2023 and the Registration of Electors Regulations 2023. Those are two pieces of draft legislation that Sir Dennis proposes should be adopted and enacted to support the proposals or recommendations that he has advanced. There are a number of recommendations, and the main parts of the report, the Phase 1 report, I suggest are Parts 3 and Parts 5. And in particular, in those parts, these heads are dealt with: identification cards, registration for electors, residency, and confirmation. Residency is a significant issue, and it has obviously been discussed at some length. It may arise tonight. Perhaps the main point to recognize in relation to residency is that the Constitution provides at Section 33, subsection 2, at A, it provides that any Commonwealth citizen who is 18 years of age or above and satisfies the residence or domicile criteria and is not disqualified from being registered is entitled to vote. I'm not reading from the Constitution. Those who have a copy of the Constitution can see the precise words, but I believe that that is a reasonably accurate summation of what is in Section 33, subsection 2A. And I would suggest that an important factor in the residency debate and discussion is to note that at 33.2A, it is dealing with the situation that's required for a person to be registered. That is, a person who is not yet registered and wishes to be registered would need to satisfy those criteria. Commonwealth citizen, 18 or above, and satisfies whatever the criteria are in the relevant legislation. And interestingly, is not disqualified for failing to satisfy those criteria for the purpose of registration. I think the actual words in this subsection are to be registered. Now, interestingly, at B, that is 33 to B, it's dealing with a person who is already registered, and what it provides is that such a person is entitled to vote unless they are disqualified, again, for the same registration elements. That is significant, I suggest, because it is establishing the right of every citizen to vote. And that right could be resulting from their initial registration as a result of residence or domicile. Two different things, but so two means of achieving that end. And in Section 7 of the existing Constitution provides that a person who is on the register is entitled to remain on the register even if he or she travels out of Dominica and remains out of Dominica for a period less than 5 years. That has been interpreted as meaning if somebody is living out of Dominica and within a 5-year period they return to Dominica, that they are entitled to vote. I'm obviously simplifying the situation because there are references to the relevant period, which is generally election, date of election and so forth. But effectively, within a 5-year period, you return to Dominica once or more, but at least once, you're entitled to continue to remain on the register. Much of the debate is whether that should, well, there are some who say that that should not be the case at all, that once somebody is not resident in Dominica, they shouldn't be allowed to vote. So that's one view. There's another view which says that the fact that a person has now provided, once they return to Dominica, at least once during the 5-year period, they are entitled to vote. There's a second group of people that think that's fine and that should remain. And there's another group of people who believe that that 5-year rule should not exist at all, and that anybody who is on the register, once registered, should remain on the register, and their name should stay there, and should only be removed if and when they die, or if they request for their name to be removed. So those are three scenarios that that Dominica would have to consider as part of this consultation to decide which of those options that they feel should be adopted and apply to our electoral framework. In the report that Sir Dennis provided, he recommended that there should be a 5-year period, but rather than returning once, a person should have to return and spend at least 90 days in Dominica during that 5-year period. He provided an alternative, which he said, for example, if you feel 90 days is too demanding, then I suggest 50 days as an alternative. Again, some people agree, some disagree. The same three options would apply, and you will indicate where your view is on that. That is provided for at Clause 26.1 of the Proposed Registration of Electors Act 2023. Now, the other matter is the issue of identification cards. You've heard the discussion. We've been discussing identification cards for several years now. You know, in terms of what the card would be called, some people argue it should be called a voter identification card. Some argue it should be called a national identification card. So Dennis, in his report, the final report, proposed that it should be called a national identification card. I said in at a previous consultation that from a personal perspective, and if I understand what the card is for, my understanding is that the card would be used for the purpose of ensuring that anybody who voted in an election was the person who was lawfully entitled to vote. So if Levi Peter appeared at a polling station and there was a question of being sure that the person who presented themselves was indeed Levi Peter, that Levi Peter would be required to provide a card with certain information which related to him as a particular individual, and satisfied the officials at the polling booth that that indeed is Levi Peter standing before them. So from that perspective, whether you call it a voter identification card, a national identification card, a parish identification card, or a Christmas card, I suggest it doesn't make a great deal of difference. What I suggest is of greater significance is the information that is required to be on that card to ensure that it is the person in question. You may take a different view, and if you do, you're welcome to it, but I just thought I would share that for purposes of discussion. So Dennis also recommended in his report in relation to the issue of the information that should be provided by way of helping to cleanse the list and ensure that individuals are who they say they are. He suggested, or proposed, I should say, that certain public officers be required to provide information to the electoral office. One category is the permanent secretary of the Ministry for Foreign Affairs, who Sir Dennis proposed that should not later than the 30th of May in every year should submit to the Chief Registering Officer a report containing, as at that date, the name of every person who is in the service overseas, that's serving the government overseas, diplomats and so forth, the names of all registered electors who are in that category, and those people who, having previously been in that category, were no longer in that category. A second source of information that Sir Dennis recommends is the chairman of the Mental Health Review Board, who Sir Dennis recommends should every quarter provide information to the Chief Registering Officer, namely the name, street address, date of birth, and occupation of every person who has been certified during that period as having a mental disorder as defined under the Mental Health Act. The Mental Health Act defines mental disorder at Section 2 as mental illness or mental deficiency, however caused or manifested. You may want to consider and indicate as part of this confirmation process whether that is information that you think is appropriately or should appropriately be provided to the Chief Registering Officer, whether that is sufficient if you think it is, or whether more information should be provided, and so forth. The final category of information that Sir Dennis, or the final head that Sir Dennis proposed in relation to cleansing of the list under phase 1 is confirmation. And what he proposes is that within 30 days of the enactment of the Registration of Electors Act, the Electoral Commission must declare a confirmation period, and that period must be of a minimum of 6 months or a maximum of 9 months duration. So Dennis proposed that the Commission would be empowered to declare the period and facilitate the confirmation the confirmation of registration of persons, and that relates to people who are already on the list. So it doesn't apply to people who want to register and are not yet registered. They would have to go for the normal registration process, which is provided for and is the same as it currently is. But this would apply to those people who are on the list. So Dennis also proposes that consideration may be given to confirming people outside of Dominica, but he has put that in square brackets at clause 52 of the Registration of Electors Act to 2023. And he has invited or saying that the consultation and Dominica will decide whether it feels that it is appropriate for people to be confirmed outside of Dominica or not. So that's another issue for the discussion. Now, that concludes phase one. Phase two of Sir Dennis's report really is focused on things which are new to our electoral landscape. Access to the media and campaign financing, he recommends, and they are provided for in the House of Assembly Elections Act 2023, the draft that Sir Dennis proposes. The access to the media, as it suggests, is a recommendation that political parties and candidates for political office should be allowed to have equal time to spread their word or their message in the media. He confines that to state media. Some people believe it should be extended to include private media, but also some people indicate that there are additional difficulties with including private media. That obviously is something for discussion and final determination. Second matter is the use of electronic voting systems. Sir Dennis proposes that the electoral process should be conducted by way of electronic systems, but he recognizes that that is not appropriate for the immediate circumstance, but he makes that recommendation and recommends that the Electoral Commission and the state work towards that becoming a reality. Campaign financing, the third element Sir Dennis refers to, as the name suggests, that deals with his recommendations that there should be limits on the funding that is raised and that is expended during the course and for the purposes of an election campaign. He sets out a number of conditions that he recommends should apply to supplement or to implement his campaign financing recommendations. Access to the media is dealt with at clause 50, which is found in part 3 of the House of Assembly Elections Act 2023. Voting systems is found at part 4 and dealt with at clause 51 to 53. Campaign financing is dealt with at part 5, clause 54 to 75. And the offenses that he recommends should apply to this area, and the penalties are found throughout those same provisions and range from $6,000 or 12 months imprisonment to $10,000 or 12 months imprisonment. Finally, Sir Dennis recommends that there should be changes to the Electoral Commission. He suggests that there should be additional numbers. He suggests or recommends that there should be enactment of an Electoral Commission Act 2023, which would be new. We don't have one at the moment. Electoral Commission is dealt with in the Constitution and in other statutory provisions. So Dennis recommends that the Commission should have more financial autonomy, more autonomy in its staffing appointments, and that all members of the Commission, all members of committees that are appointed by the Commission, or the Chief Elections Officer, all officials who function within the electoral office should also be required to declare any private interest that they may have in relation to matters which may come up before the Commission. For those who are more interested and wish to take note, the responsibilities of the Electoral Commission are set out at Section 38 and 51 of the Constitution. Section 38 states that and I'm just going to paraphrase, the Commission is responsible for A, registration of voters for the purpose of electing representatives, and B, the conduct of election, the election of representatives and senators. So those are the two areas that Section 38 of the Constitution provides that the Electoral Commission is responsible for. Section 51 of the Constitution provides that every proposed bill or regulation, so for example, the legislation that Sir Dennis is recommending, Section 51 proposes that this must, before it goes to Parliament, must go to the Electoral Commission so that they can review and comment upon those drafts. It is in fact, Section 51 provides that it goes both to the Commission and the Chief Elections Officer. And importantly, what Section 51 says is that it must go to them so that they have sufficient opportunity to make comments thereon. That is the requirement insofar as the legislation that we are considering is concerned. I think I will stop there and simply say that the matters to be discussed are entirely up to you. I have highlighted a few. You may have identified others in your reading of the report and in your reading of the draft legislation provided with the report. And I do encourage you to raise those matters tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, AG, for this summary. At this point in time, we open the floor for your comments and feedback on various aspects of the report. Just to recap, there are some clear issues that were presented to us in the Sir Dennis Byron report, which the AG has summarized. So these issues include identification of voters. Should we have identification cards for voting? There has been much discussion on whether it should be a voter ID, as the AG said, or a national ID card. So we'd like to hear your views on this matter this evening. And with regard to the scenarios described by the Attorney General, should anyone be removed from the list? If so, how should this be dealt with? Should one be in Dominica for 50 days or 90 days during a 5-year period or 10-year period as described in the report? Or should there be no restriction at all? Should there be restrictions on political parties in terms of campaign financing? These are just a few of the burning issues that may be on your mind. However, please feel free to share any other thoughts that you may have on the Sir Dennis Byron report. I would like to remind us all that we are here for consultation. We are here to hear your views. Our views may not be the same. We may have differing views, but I do ask that, as we have asked for all of the consultations, that we respect each other's views, that we allow each other to express our opinions on these matters, and that we have a very honest and frank conversation. We have, just raise your hand and you may speak from the podium, or a mic can be brought to you, so you will let us know. Okay, so the suggestion is that because of the lighting, we would recommend that if you'd like to speak, that we use the podium. Okay, Mr. Linton would like to speak first. And then we have, just let me see your hand so I can acknowledge you right after. Okay, then we have a gentleman to the back, and okay.
Madam Chair, thank you. The new arrangements for a consultation in the Marigot community was made known to me when I arrived here this afternoon, because I thought that this was the venue for the consultation for the Northeast, which included Marigot, and so I was already here. And for that reason, I'm going to ask the residents from Benz to Wesley to be patient with me, because I realize I'm on your time this evening. And I want to say a word of welcome to the members of Cabinet, members of the 11th Parliament who are here with us this evening. Madam Chair, Mr. AG, I want to say a special word of welcome to the observers, Rafael Masaga from the Commonwealth Secretariat, Ms. Melene Green from the OAS, and Mr. Dwight Lay from the OECS, and Mr. Envoy on Electoral Reform, a very special good evening to you, sir. Mr. Former Prime Minister Edison James, good evening, sir. Participants in tonight's consultation. I want to begin with an observation on campaign financing, which is provided for in the in the provisions for the new House of Assembly Elections Act. And I do so because of comments I've heard at these consultations, as they have progressed in recent weeks, about campaign financing regulation, meaning the Treasury is going to have to provide money for political parties to campaign. I want to note that nowhere in the report of the consultant, Sir Dennis Byron, or in the actual proposals for revising the legislation, the House of Assembly Elections Act, is anything of that nature mentioned. And to make the observation that in this democracy, I believe we are committed, all of us, to a democracy where everyone has an equal voice, and that those to whom the people periodically transfer power to govern are held accountable to the needs of the people. The observation must be made that competition for political power is a key feature of life in countries run by government of the people, by the people, for the people. Political parties must raise money to fund the operations that allow them to exist and the election campaigns that present their national development plans and programs for the consideration of the people. Parties here in Dominica normally raise money from members, supporters, other individuals, or corporate donors. However, with private funding, there is the risk of influence from contributors who want to use the operations of government for private gain. Campaign finance regulation is necessary because money cannot be allowed to have controlling influence in our political system such that elections can be determined and or purchased by big money interest or criminal enterprises. So, campaign finance reform is about solutions to the critical money in politics issues that are negatively affecting elections. We have a responsibility to reform and to improve our campaign finance system with election laws that amplify the voice and impact of the people as the legitimate source of authority of government, remove the unfair influence of big money in the electoral process, require disclosure of all campaign money raised and spent, and hold elected officials and wealthy special interests accountable to the people, and also to create a level playing field for fair competition and ensure everyone plays by the same common sense rules. I had the opportunity more than 23 years ago to speak to the Prime Minister of Dominica, now Prime Minister of Dominica, at the time newly elected representative for the Vacas constituency, on national television about this very important matter of campaign finance reform. I asked him whether the time had come for us to consider campaign finance reform. His response was, quote, "Certainly, let us try to level the playing field so that everybody can have a fair chance to make a contribution to the country. There should be some kind of reform as to how we raise money for the campaign and how money is allocated. That would help tremendously in leveling the playing field," end of quote. The Prime Minister now says, and to be fair, he did reference it in that conversation back then, this question of state financing for political parties involved in election campaigns. But it has gone out now as what campaign finance regulation means. It means, from what we're hearing at some of these consultations, that political parties like UWP want money from the Treasury to campaign. I repeat, we have not proposed public funding for election campaign of political parties or individual members in independent candidates, and nor have we proposed, nor do we see in the legislation proposed by Sir Dennis Byron any provision for public funding of the election campaigns of political parties. But let's be clear, the current administration, the current regime, is benefiting from public funding of its election campaigns. It wants to excite the passions of Dominicans against public money being used for election campaigns officially, but privately, unofficially, it is using passport money through agents, etc., for its election campaigns, and it is also abusing incumbency in the seat of government to finance election campaigns. 2019, election year 2019, the overdraft of central government in that election year 2019 reached $187 million. $151 million above the limit approved by the Parliament. $151 million above the limit in the election year of 2019. $125 million of that $151 million was subsequently converted to a long-term loan at the National Bank of Dominica. Meaning, for 30 years, the people of Dominica will have to pay a loan derived from overspending by the sitting administration in the election year of 2019. Again, campaign finance reform does not necessarily mean the Treasury is going to finance political parties or that anybody is asking for the Treasury to finance political parties. That is something that came from Roosevelt Skerrit in more recent times, and something I notice has been picked up by the Labour Party operatives around Dominica participating in these consultations. In terms of the consultations, where are we? I hope that these consultations mean that the government understands they need to get it right with what is right for the people, as opposed to what is right for any particular political party or candidate or special interest. We are where we are today because some years ago, the head of the Labour Party accepted advice that frustrated the implementation of electoral reforms in Dominica. This email needs to be read again. It needs to be read over and over again until everybody can recite it by heart, because it is where this problem that we have with electoral reform began. From Anthony Astafan, date Thursday, March 27, 2008, 10:27 in the morning, subject urgent, to Roosevelt Skerrit, copied to Alec Lawrence, lawyer, Hartley Henry, political advisor to the Prime Minister. Brother, please do not drift too far. Tried calling you again today and just cannot get through. I spoke to Kondwani this morning. There is madness going on at the commission. You need to call in Richard Charles and Kondwani Williams. I leave today. These guys are talking about reforms to include ID cards and complete re-registration such reforms will undermine your re-election legacy, as the opposition will say, look, the commission agreed with us, reform was required because of widespread fraud. Richard Charles and Kondwani Williams were the nominees of the Dominica Labour Party on the Independent Electoral Commission at the time. And what was of concern to the attorney advising the government is that reforms, ID cards, and complete re-registration of voters to clean the list of voters would undermine his re-election legacy. 15 years and 5 months have gone by since that advice. And we have seen no electoral reform. Obviously, the advice was accepted. And then the reforms that were promised by the Independent Electoral Commission in 2008 never materialized in the 2009, 2014, or the 2019 elections, notwithstanding widespread protest and solution-oriented civil society intervention seeking to make the electoral process fit for the purpose of honoring and protecting the people's right to free and fair elections. This regime's attempt to revise the electoral laws a few years ago was set aside by public protest because it was intended not to reform but to deform the electoral process further by legitimizing electoral offenses like bribery and cheating, which had been engaged to influence election results since 2005. The Organization of American States is one of the organizations that has observed general elections in Dominica, and they have done that since 2009. They reported in 2022 that they have made a number of recommendations on key issues related to Dominica's electoral framework and process. And the OAS says there has been little to no progress, either legislatively or administratively, on any of the more than 50 recommendations presented to Dominica since 2009. I note that the OAS is here observing these consultations. The CARICOM is here as well. And the Commonwealth is here. The OECS is here. There was a special joint mission of the election experts from those bodies invited by the government to present proposals for reforms to be implemented before the 2019 election. The special joint mission presented reform proposals as requested. They were immediately rejected. That election of 2019 was not free. It was not fair. With another 5-year term under his belt, Roosevelt Skerritt decided electoral reform would now be placed on the agenda of Dominica. I don't know how we got into the position in this democracy where for 15 years and more, we seem to be begging one man for reforms to the country's electoral process. So then we have the Sir Dennis Byron consultancy on electoral reform. Sir Dennis Byron was described to the people of Dominica as a neutral third party of high repute, former president of the Caribbean Court of Justice. He was engaged to review existing legislation, reports from the various chief election officers, election observers, and experts, conduct and review results of public consultations and advise on changes to improve the electoral process. He was to review and advise on the provisions for eligibility to vote, including the use of identification cards for the purpose of voting. And he was required to provide a report that advises on the way forward, including but not limited to any recommended legislative reforms to achieve the electoral reform objectives. So Dennis Byron accepted the 4-month assignment, September 1st, 2020 to December 31st, 2020, and he concluded it on June 12, 2023, 2 years and 10 months later. The people of Dominica had a reasonable expectation that the legal luminary and international jurist would be independent, objective, fair, and he would exemplify the highest levels of honest professional conduct and impartial procedure in the discharge of his electoral reform responsibilities. Now, among the Election Observer Mission reports that Sir Dennis Byron was obligated to see is the Commonwealth Observer Report of 2014, which concluded that the general election in Dominica was free, but was, quote, not necessarily fair due to multiple instances of cheating and bribery, including the transportation of electors to the island to vote, and the apparent abuses of incumbency, including a lack of impartiality in the provision of public services. Bribery, cheating, abuse of incumbency, taints on the electoral process. Three key pillars in the foundation of this regime's formula for securing election results in its favor. Sir Dennis Byron was aware of the concerns expressed by the Caribbean Court of Justice, our apex court, about the tainted electoral process in Dominica. In the draft of his Phase 1 report, the importance of these electoral reforms was emphasized by the Caribbean Court of Justice when it commented, and Sir Dennis includes this comment in his draft. Quote, there remain grave areas of concern about how the process of these 2019 elections were conducted. Future elections in Dominica ought not to proceed with these or similar taints, end of quote. Roosevelt Skerry did not like that reference, so in his final Phase 1 report, Sir Dennis switched to another reference more acceptable to Roosevelt Skerry. Following a snap election, a snap no reform election on December 22nd, 2022, the Organization of American States stated, and I quote, it is clear that Dominica cannot proceed to another election under the current rules. It will therefore be essential to have a new electoral framework in place before the next poll. The rules that the OAS referred to are the same ones that the CCJ told us in July of 2022 were tainted. And therefore we got to a situation in Dominica where this business about tainted election and a flawed process was no longer about politics and United Workers' Party saying this or some other party saying that. Independent observers and persons who had seen for themselves what was happening warned us and admonished us, we need to get this right. And the CCJ also reminded us, and I quote here again, without such free and fair elections, the preambular value of the creation and maintenance of and respect for lawfully constituted authority will be fatally undermined. The consequences of such a denial that a reflection of Caribbean history demonstrates includes loss of legitimacy, public unrest, and even revolt. In contemporary terms, free and fair elections are so fundamental to the democratic way of life that without it, the very legitimacy and sovereignty of the constitutional state is brought into question, constituted as is by the people of Dominica. In this regard, it is worth reminding ourselves the will of the people shall be the basis of the authority, the legitimacy of government. Now, in the matters, end of quote, in the matters that came before the CCJ in respect of the elections of 2014 and 2019, the taints on the electoral process in Dominica were clearly pleaded. And having read the CCJ judgment of July 2022, the consultant was well aware of the taints to the electoral process, the improper election practices that attracted the concern and the admonition of the apex court. Yet, in his transmittal letter accompanying the report and the recommendations, the consultant reveals, in my view, a state of mind in which the exercise was conducted that allowed him to brush aside taints of the electoral process as party political issues. I quote, "I recognize that you were concerned, you meaning Roosevelt Skerrit, were concerned about the implication that your government had engaged in improper election practices. I observed that you have categorically and consistently denied all malfeasance allegations and attributed them to the harsh political environment. I wish to assure you, I, Sir Dennis Byron, wish to assure you, Roosevelt Skerrit, that from the outset I acted on the basis that my mandate did not encompass passing judgment on these matters. I deliberately refrained from seeking evidence on these issues. Throughout the process, I consciously steered clear of party political issues and proceeded on the premise of service to the national interest." So Dennis went on in the transmittal letter to confess to Mr. Skerrit, and I quote, "Ultimately, I concur with your assessment that there were few fundamental points on which your government policies were inconsistent with the other voices engaged in the deliberations. I listened to and considered the views expressed carefully. The content of my report varies from some of these views. Indeed," end of quote, "indeed, in the matter of views on voter ID cards versus national ID cards, biometric data, fingerprints, disqualification of voters residing overseas, and in every other area of contention arising out of Mrs. Skerrit's need for an electoral process that can be manipulated to protect his re-election legacy, the consultant came up with recommendations to support the Skerrit agenda. Number one, he proposed an act providing for the issuance and management by the Electoral Commission of a national ID card to persons outside of the electoral system for purposes which are unrelated to voting and elections, which is inconsistent with responsibilities conferred on the Electoral Commission by the Constitution or supreme law. What the Constitution provides at Section 38(1) is that the Electoral Commission shall be responsible for the registration of voters for the purpose of electing representatives and for the conduct of election of representatives and senators, and shall have such powers and other functions relating to such registration and elections as may be prescribed by law. End of quote. In the draft Phase 1 report of Sir Dennis Byron, November 2022, he deals with the importance of voter identification cards in the electoral reform process. Quote, "The introduction of voter identification cards to persons registered as electors supported with biometric data was considered one of the most important reforms by almost everyone. It was regarded as essential to eliminate or minimize a wide variety of fraudulent conduct at elections, including impersonation and multiple voting. The issue of these voter ID cards has been mandated by Clause 11 of the Registration of Electors Bill." End of quote. In his final Phase 1 report, Sir Dennis Byron made a dramatic shift to national identification cards, claiming he had a commitment to follow government policy, notwithstanding his concerns that elements of such a policy could be inconsistent with the Constitution or supreme law. And he says in his report, the Registration of Electors Amendment Bill 2019, which was tabled in Parliament but not passed, had proposed a national identification card. Inasmuch as the 2019 bill reflects government policy, the legislation I have proposed reflects in the main the provisions of that bill relating to a national ID card. However, I would be remiss if I did not highlight the following concerns. And among the 4 concerns, Sir Dennis says, quote, "A question arises whether the issue of a card for the purposes unrelated to the registration of voters and electors would be consistent with the constitutional remit of the Electoral Commission. The question is whether the promulgation of an act which provides for the issuance and management of the Electoral Commission by the Electoral Commission of a national ID card to persons outside of the electoral system and for purposes which are in the main unrelated to voting and elections would be consistent with this provision of the Constitution. This needs to be explored. End of quote. His Phase 1 report goes into great detail about using biometric data technology in the voter identification process, but it is not included, it is not reflected in the actual revised legislation he has proposed to give effect to the electoral reform recommendations. The proposed legislation, the Registration of Electors Bill 2023, contains no specific provision for the inclusion of biometric data on identification cards for voting. The security features on the card, whatever those may be, will be at the discretion of the Chief Registering Officer, and there is no requirement in the proposed law or in the regulations to the proposed law for photographs, fingerprints, ID number, voter registration number, polling district, voter name and address to be included on the ID card for voting.
Just 1 minute, Mr. Linton. I would like to recommend that we wrap up. We do have a number of others who are here who would like to contribute to this discussion. So we also would have another session in Marigot next week on Tuesday, but just for the benefit of all who are here, we would like to ensure that we can wrap up.
That
so
being the case, Madam Chair, I will leave it here, and we can pick up. If we get to Marigot, then we can talk some more. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I just want to reiterate, thank you very much, Mr. Linton, for your contribution. I would just like to reiterate that we are here, yes, for consultation to hear your views, but there are a number of us who are here, so I would advise that for future speakers, that we try to keep our contributions as reasonable as we can, so that we can all hear multiple views, that we can hear from you who are here in the Northeast today. I believe the Attorney General wanted to make a few comments.
Yeah, Madam Chair, it's unfortunate that the session took the turn that it did, but it would be remiss of me to sit here and not make some kind of response. I'm not going to go into detail because I don't think this is the proper forum, and I don't want to usurp the time that other people want to make contributions. But a whole series of claims and allegations have been made, totally political, which is fair enough, but this is probably not the forum. And what's more is that a number of them are totally inaccurate. I, as Attorney General, and someone who from at least 2015 has been involved in attempts to draft legislation. In fact, we drafted legislation. We went to the House of Assembly with the legislation in 2017. So to sit here and hear somebody come and say that the government has done nothing, I'm sorry, I can't entertain that. In addition, I have a recording on this which I was going to play of the person who just spoke saying that the draft legislation was fit for purpose. I'm not going to play it to allow other people to proceed, but I will play it at another forum where he said on Q95 FM on the 30th of August 2018 to Richie Farrell on the news that the draft that the government had gone away and prepared was good and it was fit and would work for the purpose of achieving the objective that we are seeking for electoral reform. So I can't sit here and not respond.
Thank you very much, AG. Just to recap, at the beginning, I think the AG made a few points in terms of the summary of the report. Some of the areas that we would like to hear your views on. Earlier on, we indicated national ID card, voter ID card, registration and confirmation of voters, political campaign financing, and a number of other areas. So I believe we had a few more hands up. Mr. Roll, yes? Can you stand? Would you like the mic to come to you?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, persons at the head table, the Honorable Attorney General, former Prime Minister of Dominica, Honorable James. It has been years now we've been hearing about electoral reform and championing the cause for and of electoral reform. I want to deal with just 3 items here: ID cards for voting. Brothers and sisters, I have an envelope in my hand with a few documents therein. A passport. This is my passport, and the state provides a passport for Dominicans to travel. I have here a card as a farmer so that I can sell my produce as a farmer, identifying myself as a farmer. I have another card, a driver's license, identifying myself as a driver of a vehicle. I have a social security card, identifying myself as somebody associated with the Dominica Social Security. Why then can we be talking about electoral reform and refuse to associate ourselves with an ID card specifically for voting? Not a national ID card, brothers and sisters. We believe, a national ID card involves every Dominican. There is too much room for fraud and corruption. St. Lucia have ID cards specifically for voting. Antigua has ID cards specifically for voting. Jamaica has ID cards specifically for voting. I humbly suggest to the persons involved in drafting the laws of the Commonwealth of Dominica in respect to electoral reform that we in Dominica deserves an ID card specifically for voting, a voter ID card. Thank you. Number 2, outside of Dominica, 5 years and more. I believe it is unreasonable for individuals who live in the diaspora, who enjoy all sorts of perks, sweetheart pension plans, wages. I am associated with the construction sector. If you attempt to make $250, $300 a day, you might take jail for somebody project. I have friends working in the United States for $35 an hour, $55 an hour. Why should they live in the United States, live in Great Britain, come down here on a holiday, or come down here with a ticket being paid by a political organization to keep me under the rules and regulations of a political party that has failed me, that has failed us? I believe if you live outside of Dominica for more than 5 years, you have seen greener pastures elsewhere. So you should allow us to choose the representatives we identify that can deliver for us in the Parliament of the Commonwealth of Dominica. Brothers and sisters, I want to talk about the whole question of re-registration or confirmation. I personally believe, I am convinced that the only way to ensure a clean voters list is the re-registration of voters in Dominica. However, if there are those among us who believe that the cleansing of the list can be also achieved by confirmation of voters, brothers and sisters, let us do it within the boundaries of the Commonwealth of Dominica. How can we suggest, brothers and sisters, how can we suggest that we will identify 4 or 5 countries around the world for our brothers and sisters in the United States and England to go and register? What about the other countries? There are over 200, 300 countries. You can correct me, for former foreign minister, if I'm wrong. We have to try to level the playing field. We cannot say, let us go to New York. I have 3 sisters in New York. But what about London? What about Brussels? Paris? We cannot say 4 countries or 6. No. We have to say all of them. And who is going to finance it? The most decent thing to do, in my humble opinion, brothers and sisters, is to have all of the work done within the boundaries of Dominica. And finally, brothers and sisters, the question of access to the media. Brothers and sisters, it has been painful over the years to see a political organization in government uses a private entity, a private media, to sell its message and literally closes out the opposition from access to state-owned media. If we talk about equal time, the ruling party has mastered a technique of not going on the state-owned media and using private media. So they will come and say, well, we wasn't on DBS or we wasn't on this. Let us be reasonable and honest. Let us do it not for party, but for country. Let us state, like in Antigua, every media organization, whether private or public, should give full access to medias. That is my thoughts. Thank you very much, brothers and sisters, members at the head table, for your time.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I believe we had a hand on this side. I'm not seeing, it's a bit dark on the outside. Hold on. There was someone here who wanted to speak? Okay, Mr. James?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. It's okay? Yes. But me hear the chairman ask nobody no attack. Nobody else might want to attack? No, man. You can't let them people come here and none of it talk. Madam Chair, I'm going to say protocol having been established. I'll move on. I just want to make clear that I gather that there might have been a problem with GIS, so that when Mr. Linton started to speak, he got muted. I don't know whether that is true, but I just want to say that there might be a problem there. So I hope I can speak without being muted. There's no way we can talk about meaningfully about electoral reform without paying some attention to the background. But Mr. Linton has gone somewhere in that regard. When I spoke at the State House, I did reference this famous or notorious email from Anthony Estefan. And it is of deep concern, it has to be, that the Constitution of our country gives the responsibility and the authority for electoral matters, registration and the conduct of elections, to the Electoral Commission. And yet on 2 occasions, when the Electoral Commission decided to discharge its responsibilities and duties and functions in that regard, stumbling blocks were put in its way. Mr. Linton quoted one. In 2018, I think it was, the Electoral Commission again embarked upon an exercise that would result in the cleaning of the list. It told Dominicans that it was going to go around the country and it was going to do an enumeration, an assessment or whatever to clean the list. I don't think we ever got an explanation from the Commission as to why this didn't happen. Word is that the money was not provided. the money was refused. So, okay, all right, they're double hearing me now. No, I was muted. So some of the essential features of this whole discussion about electoral reform are the list, the cleaning of the list, the question of diasporans, what should diasporans be allowed to participate, and the question of ID cards, and so on. And we are called to these consultations to have a discussion based on the Byron report. I get the sense that in a number of cases, we speak at these consultations without really having looked at, studied the Byron report. I have the 2 documents here. I've read them, not in its entirety, but I've read many of the essential features of this document. And I trust that our observations, our involvement in this exercise will, as much as possible, link with the Byron report. So these essential elements, the question of the diaspora, whether they should vote. Mr. AG, I really seek your assistance, not necessarily now, if you wish to give it, but I would ask that you look more closely at the constitutional provisions for entitlement to vote. I raised the matter at the State House, I raised it again. The constitutional provision which you cited, section 33A, it talks about in the side notes, election of representatives. A first step in the election of representatives is registration. This is not registration to put your child in school or registration to get bread somewhere. It is registration for voting, to qualify you for voting. And it is grounded in residency or domicile. You read or referred to the Constitution, you acknowledge that you didn't have it before you, but it says, every Commonwealth citizen of the age of 18 years or over, upwards, who possess such qualifications relating to residence or domicile in Dominica. In Dominica. It is not residence or domicile anywhere in the world. It is in Dominica. That's the starting point of the qualification to vote, to elect representatives. And it seems to me that once you are no longer resident or domiciled in Dominica, then that qualification for voting is not anymore available to you. What the Parliament has to do is it says about residence or domicile, as Parliament may prescribe. So Parliament must prescribe what is, expand in some way, what is residence. But I'm suggesting that Parliament cannot segue from residence to this thing about absence. I'm suggesting that. So if we accept that, and I want to say also that it is not anybody, any one of us in these consultations who is determining or saying that we don't want so and so and we don't want so and so to be on the list. To me, it's the Constitution. So I'm asking the AG, because I suspect the AG himself probably should by now feel the need for him to, engage with some other colleagues of his as to this question of the constitutionality of segueing from residency and domicile to absence and presence. I'm suggesting that. Because we're talking about reform, and the new term came in, modernization. When I look at the thing that it says consultation on reform, we didn't have time to change it to include modernization, it's a reform. But reform, modernization, this is the time as we're doing this exercise for us to, if indeed we conclude we are satisfied, as I am, that it is residency, and that a law which exists now talks about absence, that we should, in the new legislation, make the responsibility or the question of removing people's names from the list based on residency and not absence or presence from Dominica. While I'm on the Constitution, I also speak to the question of confirmation, the proposal, the provision for confirmation, a confirmation exercise to be done. Support that. I'm only suggesting that it should be done in Dominica. Because, based on the proposals from Sir Dennis, which suggest that there should be 4 centers, confirmation centers outside of Dominica, as I said on Monday, it seems to me that we will be discriminating against Dominicans, because we cannot, by putting 4 centers in this whole wide world outside of Dominica, we cannot but discriminate against people who cannot be who are not in New York, or who are not in London, or who are not in Toronto, or who are not in St. Croix, if these are the 4 centers we're going to set up. Think about the number of other countries where people are, and they will not be afforded the same sort of opportunity. That would be discrimination to my mind. Well, Mr. Linton has mentioned the question of the CCJ and so on, and I don't think I want to go over that. But when we talk about the confirmation process, I dealt with that, discrimination, yes. Electronic voting, Sir Byron mentioned that. And I know that the Commission and the government have recognized already the need for electronic voting and for ID cards to include fingerprints. My understanding is on that on that basis that the government and the Commission obtained the SEMLEX system to facilitate electronic voting or ID cards to include fingerprints and so on. So let us not worry about what criminals might say and what concerns they might have about their fingerprints being in the data. Let's not be concerned about that, because I've heard talk about that might be a pushback and so on. Let's not concern about that. Let's deal with the real issue. I want also to make the point that when it comes to the media, that the media, the private media, should be included in the access that the political parties should have. That is, you can't force a private medium to allow party A or party B to be on its radio station. Perhaps you can't force that. But if they are going to allow one, they must allow all. If they're going to allow one, they must allow all. And I've given my rationale. I believe the Constitution says that you cannot, nobody, providing a public service in this case, can discriminate against anyone or entity on the basis of political considerations. And if you're going to give party A an opportunity to spread its message on your station, which is providing a public service, you cannot and should not be able to discriminate against the other party. And I go further and say that the private radio stations pay a license, and this is because they are using state property. They're using state property. The airwaves belong to the states. Me and you and all of us. So you cannot be discriminating against me, paying my taxes. Sales tax. I don't pay income tax anymore. They don't charge me income tax now. But I pay sales tax. So you can't discriminate against me. Yeah? VAT? VAT, yes, VAT. What did I say? VAT. Yeah, it's VAT now, yes. Thank you, Madam Chairman. It's good to have a chairman who assists, you know. You know, last time I was at the podium, I had a chairman who I had a little engagement with. Okay? So, I'm saying that, yeah, that's the point I'm making with respect to media. The question of petitions, Sir Byron proposed petition rules. Question of petitions. I say again that under the current arrangements, the law which the Constitution allows the Parliament to pass, the law provides that election petitions, and we know about petitions, we've had the petitions in 2005, 2009, 2014, 2019, I will last all of them. All of them I will last. So the election petitions, the law provides that an election petition must be filed within 21 days of the election. But once that petition is filed, there is no provision in the law that forces this petition matter to be settled within a given time. So petitions have gone on from the time they were filed, and they're not resolved until 2.5 years, 3 years down the road. That cannot be right. We are suggesting, Mr. AG, that the rules, petition rules, be so structured, or the law rather, should provide that when an election petition is filed, yes, within the 21 days, within 90 days, the entire process must be completed and concluded so that people know as soon as possible, as early as possible, who their elected representatives are. That is what I would suggest. I want to thank you, Madam Chair, or whoever is responsible. I think it might be the Election Reform ZA, for giving us opportunity here. And you know, representation is important, you know, because we made representation for Marigot. And so I understand that we'll be having a session in Marigot next Tuesday. So I promise you, God willing, I'll be there. So I'm going to stop now because the chairman has told me she doesn't want to stop me, but don't talk too long. So I respect her. Thank you very much. Okay.
Yes. Thank you very much, Mr. James, and we appreciate your contribution. I believe the Attorney General would like to make some comments. Since you have engaged the Attorney and asked for his response on some matters, he will. But I want to say, after the AG, I do realize some of you may not like the spotlight. Literally, there's a spotlight on the podium. So feel free to raise your hands, and the mic will come to you where you are. Okay, some of the shy ones, my friends from Benz, we will send the mic to the audience to you. I know you have something to say. AG?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I suspect, because people are not rushing to the podium, that I probably am not denying anybody too much of an opportunity. Just to respond, Mr. James asked me to address the issue of residence. Mr. James, I will address this comprehensively on next week when we're at Marigot, and you just indicated that you'll be there also. But I'll give a taster so that maybe you can go and converse with your colleagues and do your own research, and we can probably, at some point, have a meeting of the minds. Section 33 of the Constitution, which you refer to, Section 33(2), which I do have before me now because I have a copy of the Constitution, says at subsection 2A, and I think it's important for the listeners and for the people here that I read it, as opposed to what I did earlier. Every Commonwealth citizen of the age of 18 years or upwards who possesses such qualifications relating to residence or domicile in Dominica as Parliament may prescribe shall, unless he is disqualified by Parliament from registration, and I ask that you note those two words, from registration, as a voter for the purpose of electing representatives, be entitled to be registered as such a voter in accordance with the provisions of any law in that behalf, and no other person may be so registered. So 2A is dealing with a person and the qualifications required for a person to be registered as a voter. So let's move to 2B. 2B reads as follows. Every person who is registered, so not seeking to be registered, who is registered as aforesaid in any constituency shall, and listen to this, unless he is disqualified by Parliament from voting in that constituency in any election of representatives, be entitled so to vote in accordance with the provisions of any law in that behalf, and no other person may vote. The significance of the distinction between 2A and 2B, I suggest, is this. In 2A, it is stating there is a requirement for residence or domicile so as to be able to be registered. In 2B, it is stating where once a person is registered, unless he or she is disqualified by Parliament from voting, not from registration, from voting, he or she is entitled to remain on the register. Last few words were my own addition, but that is the interpretation of it. And in relation to the issue of disqualification, so Dennis addresses that at page 19 of his phase 1 report under the heading disqualification, which reads as follows: the persons with residence qualification who are disqualified to vote are persons of unsound mind, undergoing any sentence of imprisonment in Dominica of more than 1 year. The third category is under sentence of death imposed by any court in the Commonwealth. And third and final is disqualified by any written law. Those provisions that I just referred to are found at section 6 of the existing Registration of Electors Act, chapter 203. And I'm not going to read them, but A, B, C, D are the provisions that cover the 4 elements that Sir Dennis referred to in his report. So what I would say in summary is this, that all of the hullabaloo about absence and its ordinary residence and all of that, ordinary residence relates to the requirement to become registered. It does not relate to a person who is already registered and who remains entitled to vote as it currently stands until he or she is removed. And if one observes the existing legislation, it actually provides that the list, at the point that the writ is issued, the list that exists, subject to the amendments that the Constitution and the legislation provide, the list is conclusive. So whoever's on it is entitled to vote.
Thank you, AG. I just wanted to point out, Mr. James, that we've checked with our technicians. Our audio did not drop, so the messenger, you can let them know that their mic was probably muted on their device, but our live stream has been on throughout. Okay, thank you for that. I believe Mr. White would like to speak. We can take the mic to you. Or are you coming up?
Good evening, members of the head table. I believe protocol has already been established. Let me just say that I would oppose any suggestion of people who reside overseas to be denied the rights to vote. I believe that once someone is registered to vote, that you should only be removed if deaf. I don't support the expansion of the Electoral Commission. And there's an issue of campaign financing. I strongly believe that we shouldn't look in that direction. I don't agree. I don't agree that the Treasury should finance political parties or candidates or individuals to run for election or seek office. That to me is that you put in a burden. We all come from different walks of life. We all come from different backgrounds, and to ask the Treasury to pay candidates to run for election is putting financial hardship on the citizens of the Commonwealth, and I don't think that we should look in that direction. And lastly, I fully support the national ID card. I'm in full support of the national ID card because it's a card that can serve both purposes. It can serve as a voter ID card and it can serve as a national ID card. And while reading through the document, I could have sworn that I saw that in the amount of 1.5 million was already allocated to purchase the machine for the national ID card. So if we already have the machine, why should we look into other avenues, and we already have the technology at our disposal? I thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. White. There is a gentleman at the back. The mic is next to you. You can speak from where you are.
Charles Richards.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, all right. Okay, good evening to Chair, to the AG. My concern really is a few concerns. The overseas residents. I believe since you registered to vote as a Dominican, your name shouldn't be removed from the list until you die. No, I have a concern that some like Commonwealth citizens who passed due to their work was in Dominica and their name is on this voters list still and they're out of state for over 5 years, I believe we should remove them. We should remove their names from the voters list. But as born Dominicans, always coming and going, I don't think we should remove their name from the list. And for the voters' ID card, I believe the reason for identification card is your picture to prove that I am Charles Richards. So if I come with a passport to vote and I have my driver's license or my passport, you watch it. That is Charles Richards. So I don't see a problem in that. Why I should have a specific card for voting. Because all you want to do is identify that is Charles Richards. I think that should be the purpose. So I don't see no reason about this voters ID card and even fingerprint and all them stuff. Because when you leave to go and vote, when you tell the officer in the polling station, I am Charles Richards. They look on the paper, they look on the sheet, they have you have your number, you know. They see your number. And then they allow you to vote. But if you feel you want, if you're in a doubt, I don't see why you cannot use a passport or a driver's license to prove that is Charles Richards. You know? So I don't see the need for any voter's ID card. To me, that doesn't make sense. And about the how you call it, the term limit for Prime Minister, I totally against that too. Because it's the people that are deciding. If you go up for election and people decide, well, you had 10 years, I know voting you. But if you continue voting you, because the people want you. So why put a limit on them? Eh? If the people want you as Prime Minister, they vote for you. If they don't want you, they don't vote for you. So you see why you have to put any restriction on them, to come and say about term limit. And the other question about Prime Minister having the date of election in back pocket. Eugenie had this in her handbag. Nobody never say anything. She call it when she want. Mr. James had this in his back pocket. He called it without some people even know. You understand? Then you come again, Mr. Skerritt, he have it in his back pocket, call it when you want, but that is something that continue to happen. No, and the question is not that I'm making you going to win or lose the election, Because Eugenia lose the election, Mr. James lose the election, although he had it in his back pocket, he still lose the election. You understand? So I don't see the need for that. You understand? So that is my humble opinion. That is my humble opinion. Okay?
Thank you very much for your humble opinion, Mr. Charles. Did we have, okay. Would you like to?
Good night, everyone. The observers, good night. Mr. AG, special good night. I must say I love my country. If I would start my conversation tonight and did not allude to the fact that I love my country, it would be remiss of me. I want to start with Mr. AG. In your introduction, you alluded to the fact about the voter ID card as to whether it should be a voter ID or a national ID. And you were on the way of specifying your own thoughts, but you fell short. So when I'm done, I would like you to come up here and tell the crowd what card you think it's supposed to be. Now, I have a lot to say, but I think a lot of Dominicans have pretty much said what I really would want to say. But I want to start tonight by saying, I feel very removed due to the fact that opposition forces or Dominicans have been begging for an electoral reform since I could remember 2008, 2009, somewhere about there. We did form an electoral commission. And tonight, or from the first night of this getting together, I would have expected to see members from the commission delivering the information to the Dominican Labour Party, to the UWP, to the Dominica Freedom Party, and to whoever party it is. But for some unseen situation, we now have members of the government disseminating the information to us. And for that, I would want to say it is categorically unfair. The Dominican Labour Party people should be recipients tonight and every other night. There are lawyers on the commission. Maybe you might want to say that Mr. AG, because of his position, would want to be one of these people disseminating information. So I could give him, I'm not embarrassing myself, you need to listen. You need to stop carrying the politics everywhere you go. This is not for politics. This is for Dominica. No, you have to talk to them. That's how they are. You don't come here and leave here empty. You come here to get better off in your mind so you can go back to your children and explain to them. A few years ago, Tony Astafan, he sat at ZDK Radio and he fought tooth and nail for the Antiguans to receive a voter's ID card. What is the problem why Dominican people cannot have a voter's ID card? He comes to you now and he tells you, I cannot afford. Who does Dominica belong to? Does it belong to Tony or does it belong to every Dominican? This is where I'm going. Tonight is not no time for no politics. Tonight is not a time to come here in no red clothes and trying to back a party. No, we're not for that tonight. Tonight is for Dominica. Many of us here over 40, our death bell will come just now. And we will die. And what we will leave for our children behind. This is where we need to go. So, to the observers, I hope you can see to yourself, or you're observing the fact that we are in a situation where you have the government. The government is telling us where we should go, whereas the government people itself should be the ones together with us sitting down there and listening. Yes, they might say they're sitting down there tonight, but there are people up here representing the state. And the people we nominated to form the laws or do whatever they have to do in the commission. None of them are here tonight. And you beg yourself the question, why? Why? You'll go to Marigot next Tuesday, and none of them will be there. And you'll ask yourself the question again, why? That is where I see my interest. I see it for the future of Dominica. And somebody said a while ago, before I leave, that they bought a machine to print national ID cards. Fine. I have no problems with that. But a machine is a machine. He also went on to say that, well, he alluded to the fact about the overseas vote. With a national ID card, my friend, a lot of things can happen. And I'll tell you, who is to say that the people that obtain our Dominican passports, who are not born and bred Dominicans, who is to say that those people cannot be influenced by the state to come here and vote? Who is to say that? We may say that people from Wesley living abroad and they come or they send barrel for their family can vote. That might be an argument. But what about the people who has never set foot in Dominica? What about those people? What about the state going out to them and asking them to come back here to do them a favor? And we all know what the favor is. Now, where do we go? 20,000 people come in from Asia, and they come to Dominica and they vote. And they vote in favor of the incumbent. What happens? Do you think you, the people in Dominica here purporting for the Labour Party, would be happier than ever? I beg to differ. So, that is my little plan, my little thought. I want to think that we need a voter's ID card. I heard my good friend say a while ago, we don't need to clean the list in a certain way. Yes, we need to remove the dead people, because in my constituency, in 2019, I saw a lady, and I only knew her on a picture in an album at home. I'm 51 today, this year. And 2019 from now will be how many years? About 4 years? So I was about 47. And for my 47 years of life, I've never seen that person. But that would mean that that person was never registered in Dominica, because I saw the first election in Dominica since we get independence. That's how I know. Okay? That person left Dominica. That person left Dominica in the Windrush. They went to England on a boat. If you understand what I'm saying. They left here young and they went to London on a boat. Dominica didn't even have airport to send them. But they came back to Dominica. They came here and they voted here. We all know that. Don't run away from the fact. We know we're from Wesley. You know. So those are the Maclear, you don't need to do that, Maclear. We're all from Wesley. You said what you had to say a while ago. Listen to what I'm saying. Okay? Right. So, these are the things, you know. We can jump high, we can jump low. Those are the things that affect Dominican people. Yes, today we have a Labour Party government. Whatever they do or continue to do, it will affect us in some way. Look at our situation now. Dominica is in no good situation now. It's a fact. But I don't want to go there. This is not about that tonight. This is about electoral reform. And I want to say, we need a voter's ID card. We need to clean the voters list. There are some technicalities about people living overseas. I personally, I cannot fathom people living overseas and paying taxes overseas. And because my father sent a barrel for me, he left here in 1977, never passed back Dominica. And because my father sent a barrel for me once a year, that gives him the right to come to change the status quo in Dominica. No, I say no, I will continue to say no. And Mr. AG, I hope you can correct me if I'm wrong. This is where I'll keep it for now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your contribution and for sharing your views. I just wanted to note that at the beginning, I'm not sure if a few of us were late, and I think at the last consultation, the AG set the context for the consultations being run here. Of course, the government is expected to approve and recommend these, this legislation has to go to Parliament. And it goes to Parliament, of course the Cabinet approves, and it goes to Parliament to be voted on. And we do need to understand that the consultation, as you said yourself, we are here to listen. So we are here, the government is here, the community is here, and we are all here to listen, to hear your views as to what you think should be included in this legislation. I am not sure if the AG wanted to respond on the issue of registration to vote, but if not, we will have... Okay, thank you, AG.
Madam Chair, just two things. One is, I think, it may be the last speaker wasn't here at the outset of my presentation, when I addressed the responsibilities of the Electoral Commission as provided for in Section 38 and 51 of the Constitution. But of course he can read those if he chooses to do so subsequently. But just in terms of, throughout all of these consultations, I've heard a lot about the Electoral Commission. Fine, the Constitution provides for it, we need it. But there's a certain suggestion that somehow the criticisms that are being leveled at the government for trying to put this consultation together and get this process forward wouldn't be leveled at the Commission. It would, and it is, even during these consultations. There are criticisms being leveled against the Commission, or usually at particular members who are not on a perceived side or the other. And it's important to recognize that the Constitution provides for the composition of the Constitution. And it provides, I suggest, for a political composition. Why do I say that? Because what it says at Section 56, subsection 3, is that the Commission shall consist of a chairman appointed by the President, who in that role acts in his own deliberate judgment. Secondly, 2 members appointed by the President acting in accordance with the advice of the Prime Minister. And I don't think anybody would expect the Prime Minister to nominate to the President for appointment to the Electoral Commission someone who he feels is somebody who is against him. Let's put it that way. And secondly, it provides for the President to appoint 2 people on the advice of the Leader of the Opposition. So you wouldn't expect the Leader of the Opposition to nominate to the President somebody who he or she thinks is not somebody who is, or put it differently, somebody who is anti them. So let's strip away a lot of this pretense. What we need to do is deal with the facts. The facts are set out in the report. We have a number of issues that Sir Dennis recommends. There are others that we may think of ourselves. Let's put them forward. Let's discuss them. Let's determine which of those we feel we can go forward with, and let's go forward with them. Let's stop trying to fight over things that perhaps we don't need to. And I should say that I have it before me, the reference to the identification cards, and again a repeated suggestion that there is opposition. I think we have consensus, if I understand it, that identification cards can be used. I think some people believe that identification cards are not necessary, and we've heard people saying that. But there are other people who say, okay, it's not necessary, but okay, let's have it. The issue, as I've understood it, is largely what should be in them. Should there be fingerprints? Should there be facial recognition features? Should there be photographs? Should it be, I suppose somebody might say, should it be a color photograph? Should it be a black and white photograph? What's the nature of it? But as early as 2017, and I'm looking at on my phone at a 2017 draft of the Registration of Electors Amendment Act, Clause 9 of that draft bill, which was proposed to be Section 19A of the existing Act, stated that for the purposes of Section 19 of the Commission, Electoral Commission, shall, after consultation with the Chief Elections Officer, appoint enrollment officers. Sorry, I think I was looking at the wrong thing there. No, right, it's clause 8, which is a proposed amendment to the existing act to replace the existing section 19 of the Registration of Electors Act, chapter 203, with this. The Chief Registering Officer shall A, cause national identification cards containing prescribed information to be issued in accordance with regulations. B, maintain a roll of persons who have been issued national identification cards. C, designate locations for the purpose of the issuing of national identification cards. And subsection 2, notwithstanding subsection 1, if he considers it appropriate to do so, by order, prescribe other suitable methods of preventing electors from voting more than once in the same election. That provision for identification cards was in the 2017 draft, indeed the bill which went to the House of Parliament, the House of Assembly, and wasn't proceeded with. We need not tonight go into the reasons for that.
Thank you very much, AG. Mr. Linton, Brian Linton.
Good night, Madam Chair. I had a very excellent working relationship with the chairman at the Dominica State College. The Minister of Education is my colleague at the Dominica Teachers College. Fidel Grant, that is like a family member to his father. I had an encounter with the Tsar of election reform or modernization, Mr. Kenneth Daru, when I was the general secretary of the United Workers' Party. Mr. Daru was one of the prospects that were under consideration to contest the seat in the Pittet Savan constituency on a United Workers' Party ticket. That is important for us to establish, to know that I come here in peace. Yes, I come here in peace, because you see, when we're talking about voter registration and voter ID card, some time ago I heard a presentation from Attorney Newell's Knight, which was very informative with respect to the difference between a national identification card and a voter identification card. There's a significant difference between those two documents. The question is the question of relevance. A passport is not, which is a national identification document, it is not relevant to voting. On a voter identification card, you'll have information relevant and specific to voting with respect to the voter carrying the card. For example, his name, his picture, his voter registration number, his polling district, the constituency in which he's voting. All of these are specific to voting. So that is what you'd find on a voter registration card. You will not find that information specific or relevant to voting on any other type of national identification card. And as you heard from, I think, the AG or one of the presenters before, on that very issue of the Election Commission issuing national identification cards, Mr. Byron, the consultant, has concerns about that. He warns us in his report. So I hope all of us who are supporting this national identification card, I hope you're also aware of the fact that Mr. Byron has concerns about if the Commission has authority to issue national identification cards. I want the observers to understand in Dominica, we have laws already on the books that makes provision for us to have a clean voters list. We have laws already on the books which make provision, give the Commission the authority to issue national ID cards, voter ID cards. Somehow, our list is bloated. We have more people on the list than the population of Dominica, and that in itself is very embarrassing. So anybody talking about we do not need to clean list, that's foolishness. Stop. We cannot propagate that type of foolishness. The list must be cleaned. The laws make arrangement for the list to be cleaned periodically, where people come, submit names, submit whatnot and so on, and the electoral office does the investigation, and they decide whether or not the name should be removed and so on. That has been an ongoing process. Although we have had situations just about the 2019 elections where we submitted over 1,000 concerns to the Electoral Commission so that they could address names that should not be on the list, and those names were disregarded. So I want the observers to take note of that as well, in terms of the difficulty that we've had in implementing the mechanism to clean the list periodically. I want to read something there, you know. The Deputy U.S. Permanent Representative, Alexis F. Ludwig, in a statement at the OECS Permanent Council, recalled the joint OAS, CARICOM, and Commonwealth mission to Dominica by last August, and 3 areas of concerns were identified for free and fair and transparent elections. That's the OAS, the Commonwealth, and some other big organization. Here are the 3 areas, again, just for emphasis. 1, removal of deceased persons and illegible voters from the current electoral list. That's not us saying that. That is the observers who are sitting there. That's what they told us years ago. The second thing they told us years ago, I guess they probably surprised to hear that we're still telling them things about what they recommended to us, and they still not recommended. The other thing they recommended was the issuance of photo identification cards to electors to facilitate more accurate identification at the polls. And 3, removal from the current electoral list of all diaspora voters who are ineligible to vote by virtue of being out of the country for more than 5 years. Okay? So that is from the OAS, the CARICOM. Those are things that they recommended to us years ago. We heard about the email from Tony Astafan in 2008. That is the email which gave the government ministers and the government machinery the instructions and the guidance to frustrate electoral reform in Dominica, to allow dead people to continue to be on the list so that they could facilitate the tainted election process as outlined by the CCJ. Many of you don't understand what the CCJ is. That is the Caribbean Court of Justice. It is this government who decided to move from the Privy Council to the CCJ to be our final court of appeal. And the CCJ warned the people of Dominica, warned you, please do not allow us to have elections in the future with the taints that have been happening in elections since 2009. They've warned us because they recognize in Dominica since 2009 we have never had a free and fair elections. The other thing we're talking about is people coming in to vote. What I'm discovering, listening to the conversation, is that people who are in the diaspora, who have disqualified themselves to vote by changing their residency, they are the ones who paid their passage, take their money from their pocket, and decide to leave Dominica because it's probably too hard for them in Dominica, they cannot make it, to go and work in another man's country, to develop his country, to pay taxes in that country. And every 5 years, they expect a gift from a party, a gift of a free ticket to come and vote for that party. They cannot even afford to pay for their own tickets to come and vote. And that is their big issue. Their issue is the receipt of that free ticket. The free ticket that labor rights alone get to come to vote in Dominica. Okay? So that is the problem. That is the problem that we have, causing all of the confusion. Why people cannot understand the reasoning in the fact that only residents of a country have the right to vote in a country. They are the ones paying the taxes in the country. They are the ones suffering from whatever consequences the laws of the country have on them. So they are the ones who have the right to vote. How can you consider it fair for somebody living overseas all of their life, get a free ticket, come down to vote, they have passage money, they have hotel money, they have spending money. They get a vacation, they vote, they go back. And then they leave the government to implement its policies on you that may be affecting you negatively while they are away, enjoying themselves in the country that they choose to go to, the country that they went to, where they put their hand in their pocket. Not government that sent them away. It wasn't the government who paid their passage to go where they went to establish new residence. But as we've heard from previous presenters, and the AG knows that very well, because if you talk to, I heard Commissioner Hilary Shillingford on Q95 the other day, explaining something about a conversation he had with Mr. Byron. And Mr. Byron, from what I understand from Commissioner Hilary Shillingford, Mr. Byron is convinced that if we have more aggressive lawyers in Dominica, they will challenge the government's position of entitlement by, absence rather than residence. Because of the fact that the Constitution, as we heard, firmly establishes that for you to be entitled to be on any voters list in Dominica, the main qualification, you must be resident in Dominica. We have economic citizens right now. They have no resident in Dominica. Are you telling me that they are entitled to come and vote in Dominica? Economic citizens. Citizens who are official citizens of Dominica. Never been to Dominica once in their life. Never sent a barrel. Never sent a 5 cents. Have no relatives in Dominica. Nobody to come to, no links. Are you saying that you would want those people, 20,000, over the past 3 years, this government sold over 46,000 passports. Do you understand what that means to you? That's 46,000 new Dominicans out there that you don't know anything about. They never sent a barrel to you yet. But you are saying, based on your argument, that they are entitled to vote. They have a right to vote. Are you listening to yourselves? Observers, are you listening to the arguments that the government supporters are making to continue to try to legitimize illegal elections? That is what is happening. The government, what we're seeing the government supporting is confirmation of the fact that the government is admitting that they have been involved in cheating and bribing. So to get rid of that problem, they want to make it law. That is what is happening. Because the CCJ confirmed to us that elections in Dominica have been tainted. And what we hear coming from the government and their supporters is an admission that the elections indeed have been tainted, and right now they are on a mission to make what is illegal to make it legal. We have a situation before us where a criminal complaint was filed against 14 government ministers, a criminal complaint relating to election issues. It reached to the CCJ. The CCJ said, ordered the courts in Dominica to try the case. But because, again, they have manipulated the system and even the legal system too, after the CCJ gave the court in Dominica the order to try the case, what did they do? They went and they asked, they allowed their DPP to nullify the case that the CCJ, the highest court in the land, gave order to go to trial. The government turned around through their DPP and nullified the case. That had to do with election issues. I hope the Tsar is listening, you know, for him to take his notes. Because those are the issues that we have to be dealing with. And as somebody, I think is Mr. Roll indicated, today the United Workers' Party is in opposition, the Freedom Party is in opposition. Tomorrow, maybe the Labour Party Day, who knows? Or probably some of you believe that the Labour Party has no tomorrow. They're there for life. Check? So that is what all we are asking for in this process is a level playing field. And in conclusion, I want to concur with the concern of Mr. Roll with respect to the role of the Electoral Commission. And while I am on that, I want to advise the ministers of government, beginning with the Tsar. And Mr. Henderson, my friend, very good relationship as my boss in the Ministry of Education. Excellent relationship. Please inform and educate your members properly. I hate to see people take advantage of the ignorance of people. Because you see, around you they will be clapping. But when they go in other forums, they will embarrass themselves. So please inform and educate your people properly. The Electoral Commission, the observers, all of the government representatives on the Electoral Commission are passport peddlers, every one of them. I hope the observers are aware of that. Okay? All of them. And I wonder why, because we're talking about qualifications to, because the Attorney General made the point, a very good point. The Attorney General said that the Prime Minister would not appoint anybody to the commission which is against him. Is fine. I just want to find out, because I said in conclusion, why is it that all of the representatives on the Electoral Commission for representing the government are passport peddlers, and why is it that it is Mr. Daru that is the Tsar? We are not seeing anything. We have Duncan Stowe, the government representative who is the chairman of the Electoral Commission. Okay? So all of those things are things that we need to understand if we truly want electoral reform that will create the balance or the level playing field. Madam Chairman, thank you for your indulgence. Thank you.
Yes, hold on. We have a couple of contributions, but I believe the Attorney General wanted to. But before we get to the AG, we have about 3 hands. We had Ms. Fabian who wanted to speak. We had Mr. Nansen. There is the young lady from the Kalibishi Village Council, and then Mr. Joseph. So the mic can be brought to you, or you can come up.
All right, good evening, everyone. Recognizing the head table, the ministers of government, the observers, ladies and gentlemen, members from the constituencies. I'm a community member from the village of Benz, and this is where I will share my perspectives from.
Can we have some order? Can we have some order, please? There's a speaker on the floor. Go ahead, Ms. Fabian.
Great. I'm happy to be able to share my perspectives on some of the points that have been raised this evening, where we're able to share our feedback and areas that we see how we could improve as Dominicans. The first area that I would like to share on is a matter of the voters' ID cards. And my perspective is that national ID cards should be recommended as opposed to just voters' ID card. Reason being, multi-purpose ID cards are useful for travel and for other purposes. And I believe that as Dominica, as a country that's looking at being forward-thinking, being a country that can set the pace, not only following other countries because some other countries have adopted certain practices, but we can set the stage for what we want to happen in Dominica. And this, with a national ID card, can help us to set the stage in an area that I think would be trend-setting for our country. I agree to the bill that we should amend the House of Assembly Act to require electors to present a valid identification card at polling stations and allow for alternative procedure for persons who have lost, misplaced, or do not have an identification card. Now, one of the areas that I think that we could be forward-thinking in this area is to cross-reference a national ID card with a voter's registration. I do not think that we need a card specifically for voting, but we need a national ID card that can include the details, what some persons are also asking, that can be used as part of the voter's registration. In looking at some of the countries of those who've had voter's ID card and other type of cards that are used for voting, it also includes the polling station where a voter needs to, where they're registered at. And I think that information is extremely important. Whichever party you're in, whatever you're doing, I think that it's important that we're able to recognize as part of that identification the details of a voter in Dominica. When COVID arose, we had some cards initially, and I still have the card that I walk around with, but we innovated and we had COVID electronic recognition or IDs that we could travel with, and it was recognized across the world. I think similarly with the voter's ID card and with the national ID card, where we include the voter's registration, we could have that similar cross-reference. I think that card should have electronic stripe. It should have some high technology that we can use to travel, to do many different things. But also looking at how do we innovate in our health system and cross-reference this exact national ID card with our health system that we're able to access certain information, and it could be used across different parts of our country. I believe that why invest in a voter's ID card when other forms of IDs are acceptable? Reference was made to other countries who use voters' ID card, but some of these same countries have identified that you do not need to work with the voters' ID card when you go to vote. You can use an alternate form of ID, such as the passport, the driver's license, and other forms of ID. So my recommendation on the voters' ID card, part of the discussion, is that we have a multi-purpose national ID card and we innovate, we set the trend, we set the pace that other countries can now follow. In terms of residency and the diaspora, I believe that if someone meets the requirements of being a resident of Dominica, they should be allowed to vote as they have a vested interest in the country. I know the concern is also about the persons who become citizens of Dominica through economic means. If they meet the requirement of Dominica, there should be a minimum standard, a standard that's applicable to everyone. You must be resident in Dominica for a certain period before you're eligible to vote. So someone who is an economic citizen cannot just come and vote. They have to meet a minimum requirement in order to be able to vote. Now, when we look at the matter of voting, I believe that everyone reserves a right to vote or not vote in a specific election. I listened to the contribution of some other individuals over the past nights, and it was said that if someone does not vote in 2 consecutive elections, then they should be taken out. It was a recommendation that they should be taken out of the list. I beg to differ. For one of the reasons, and this is my personal information that's going out in this, for the last 2 elections, I had personal commitments otherwise. And sometimes we have Dominicans who have personal commitments to do something else in the exact time that election is being called. What do we say to that Dominican who resides here, who contributes to taxes, who contributes to the economy, that they are not able to continue to be part of that list? I beg to differ that once someone who is a Dominican or someone who is part of the list have the right to vote or not vote in election due to specific reasons. And as per recommendation, withholding our vote is also a personal choice, and we have to bear the consequences when our voice is not heard through election. Whatever the result, we must accept that this is the result. Once it's done in the right way, we must accept what the result is. However, finally, it should not be mandated that we're removed from the list if we do not exercise our right and choice in regard to vote. In terms of confirmation, if we do move to that point of confirmation, I recommend that we have a period long enough to allow for persons who are out of Dominica to be able to be confirmed. That's only if we move to that point. But also, there's no need, my opinion is that there's no need for us to go to a few other countries to confirm that list, because there are persons, of course, who may be far from that location and may not be able to be confirmed. In terms of the electronic voting system, I agree that it's a good move for our future to allow for greater efficiency in the process. And it would also be important that we ensure the necessary infrastructure is in place. It may require that we need internet connection or some other infrastructure to ensure that this could take place across all constituencies. It's also important that we protect the data of people, whether it's with the electronic cards and with the electronic voting system. I think we need to pay keen attention to this so that our data will not be compromised. In regards to the Electoral Commission Act, there certainly needs to be autonomy of the Electoral Commission. And in some cases, in even reviewing and having different discussions, I believe that the Electoral Commission can have the responsibility to review the list. In regards to the cleansing, linking this with the cleansing of the list, I believe that provisions can be made to have a review of the list. We are part of the communities. We are part of the constituencies. Some say we know everyone, and that's fine. But I think it's important that persons from different stakeholders, whether from different parties, including the Electoral Commission, including the Registry Office, and different key groupings, representatives can come together, look at the list, look and see those who are dead. We may not have a family member coming and indicating that my family member has died. I believe that there should be a process of cleaning the list of persons who are no longer alive, and this can be part of the autonomy that's given to the Electoral Commission. Of course, they would not be able to just strike a name from the list, but there's a certain process that takes place for removing or for cleaning to ensure that we have the most updated list. And finally, my question to AG, I hope you're able to respond to this, is what's the process after consultation? And we have proposed recommendations for inclusion in the bill. How will feedback be implemented? How will we be aware that what we've shared is actually taken into consideration before moving to Parliament, where we have our parliamentarians debating the bill in Parliament? So thank you very much for the opportunity, and I do hope that some of the recommendations here will be included in the updated bill. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Fabian, for your contribution and for those recommendations that you've made. The AG will provide a response at the end, but we are going to take all of the comments and questions that we have now. I believe we had Mr. Nanthan, and then we had the young lady who was seated at the front. I think she moved, but as soon as she comes back in, you can have the mic.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, for giving me an opportunity. I really was listening from home, and let me say I was following on GIS, Daryl, and it was very clear and never got cut off at any time. I left home to come here because it's not a far drive. I live just down the road at Bonn, but particularly because I am interested in what's happening here at Wesley. You would know, Madam Chair, and for the observers, that Wesley is one of the seats that was held by the United Workers' Party more often than most seats. So, in other words, Wesley has been a strong United Workers' Party seat. And I recall not too long ago, I happened to be at the house of the Honorable Prime Minister with somebody who I saw in this room, and the person was a guy from Wesley who lived in the States, and he came to the Prime Minister's home, and he asked somebody in this room from Wesley to take him to vacas at the Prime Minister's home, and he said, Prime Minister, I live in the US, and I have never voted for any Labour Party government at all. It's I went to school at PSS, so I know Mike, I know Rosie. I never voted for any Labour Party at all. And I have been very, very strong, adamant, vehement in opposing you and all Labour Party leaders in Dominica. But I came down to Wesley on short notice for a funeral. And the changes that I have seen in Dominica led me to wonder. And I wanted Prime Minister to apologize to you as a man, because I am a Christian, and I wanted you to forgive me and to pray with me. So I wanted to see how the trend continues in Wesley. And the fact that we had the members from Marigot, the past 2 members from Marigot coming here to defend and try to say things opposed, is no surprise to me. The fact is, the people of Dominica have spoken, and they know very well what have been going on in Dominica. And I reference for the observers an article that was written